Hello everyone. In this session, we are going to take a look at sentiment analysis. Before we start to apply sentiment analysis to the entire dataset, I want to use the first row in the review dataset as an example to show you what exactly we are doing in each step for the sentiment analysis. So let's first create a new variable called sentence, and we are going to get the description from the first row from our review dataset. And here is our sentence. So this sentence is the room was kind of clean, but had a very strong smell, and etc. So this is our example text. So in the first step, we are going to clean our text. And the first thing we'll be doing is removing the punctuation. So this function is to remove the punctuation from sentence. So let's take a look at the difference before and after we remove the punctuation. So this is our initial text, and this is the one after removing the punctuation. The next step, let's remove controlled characters. So in here, we will not really see any difference because there wasn't really controlled characters in this sentence. So now let's remove the digit. So if you compare our current sentence with the previous one, you will see that the numbers are being removed, so the digits are removed. So now the next step, what we will do is to change all the characters into their lowercase. So now you see that we changed all the characters into their lowercase. So now what we are going to do is that we're going to split the sentence into words using the str_split function, which is from the stringr package. And we are going to create a word list. And now we have cut the sentence into several separated word list. So now we are going to remove stop words from this word list. So we are excluding the words that are in the English stop words. And if you compare the word list before and after, you see that all the stop words were removed from our sentence. And in here, this is an additional step that is optional. So if you want to remove specific words from your sentence, for example, if you want to remove maybe the breakfast or star, then you can create your own removal word list, and then you can take the words that matches the words in your word list out from the word. So if you do this, now if you compare the word before and after, you see that before we have the word breakfast here, and we also have the word star, and now you see that they're both gone. So this is how we can remove specific words. And the last step is to do stemming. So if you run stemming, you will see that some of the words has been changed. For example, dogs become dog, generally becomes the root which is gener, and etc. So this is the first step to clean the data. So after we clean the data, we can load our sentiment libraries to detect the sentiment. So we will load the positive words library, and then we'll also load a negative word library. So if you pull up the POS text, you will see these are all of our positive words. And if you look at NEG text, these are all of our negative words. And what we did in here is we turned them into a word list in here. So now once we load our positive and negative words, we can compare the words to the sentiment library and see how many of them matches. So we can actually find the position of the word that matches our sentiment libraries. So you will see that in here we have clean, strong, and then some other words that is matching the positive word library. That's why in here it shows you which word from the positive library matches with our word in here. So same thing, we have a negative word, which is, if you go up, smell, is like considered a negative sentiment word in our negative library. So this is to return the position of the matching words from the libraries. What we can also do is that we can use true or false to identify if the word exists in the sentiment library or not. So instead of showing their position, we are showing true or false to see whether the this word exists in that sentiment library or not, and then we can sum how many positive words exist and how many negative words exist. And then we can assign the sentiment score. So we have already talked about this in the class. So the score will be your sum of your positive count minus the sum of negative count, which is a 4. So if this is a 4, this means overall we are considering it as a positive sentiment sentence. So now we can determine the polarity. So if the score is over 0, we'll consider it as positive. If the score is less than 0, we'll consider it as negative. If the score is equals to 0, we'll consider it as neutral. So based on that, our sentiment polarity for this sentence is positive. And then the last step is to aggregate the results. So we can actually automate step 1 to 3 using the following code, and then we can aggregate the results. So basically, we're trying to do an automation for the entire process for all the reviews in our data set. So here I want to show you an example of 1,000 sentences from our review data set. So let's create a sample of 1,000 records from the review data set. So what I have in here is a function. This function includes everything we did from the first step until here, step 3. So basically, in this function, it includes all of that. So what we're trying to do is that we are trying to put all the steps we did previously into this function so we can automate this process and apply the sentiment score calculation function to all the rows in our sample data set. So let's run it together. So let's load this function, and we are calling this function score sentiment. So now we can actually apply the function to the data. So we will create a new table called scores, and then this will be the result from this score sentiment function. And we are applying the score sentiment function to the description column from the sample data set. And we are using the positive words and negative words. So once you're done, you will see that a new table has created in here, which is the scores calculation. So in here, it has our initial sentence. It has our clean sentence. It also has the sentiment score we have calculated for each sentence. So basically, we just repeated what we did for this first sentence for every one of the description in our data set. So now we can add the sentiment score back to the sample data set. So right now we have separate data set called scores with the sentiment result. If you want to add the sentiment score result back to your sample data set, we can simply do that. So in here we are getting the score from this scores data set and then adding it as sentiment score in the sample data set. So if you click sample now, you will see that we just added the sentiment score to this sample data set. And sometimes if you want to add the polarity based on the sentiment score, we can also do that. So in this line, what we are doing is that we are creating a new column called positive in the sample data set. And then in this positive column, we will say that if the sentiment score is bigger than 0, then we will consider this as a positive sentiment sentence and we will assign 1 to it. Otherwise, it will be 0. So let's run this line and let's take a look at the sample again. So now you see for all the words, for all the sentences that have a sentiment score over 0, we will have a 1 for the positive and a 0 for those who is not above 0 for the sentiment score. So we will do the same thing. We can add another column for negative and another column for neutral. So now if you open up your sample data set, we have three columns for the sentiment polarities. So now if you want to sum the categories and create a new sentiment column, we can do so. So for this sentiment polarity, we will summarize the sentiment for each sentence. So if the sentiment score is bigger than 0, we will add positive as the value for the sentiment polarity. And so for the sentiment score that is less than 0, we will assign negative as the value for the sentiment polarity. And for the ones who are 0, we will assign neutral. So now if you view your sample, you will see that besides the 3 different columns for the polarity, we can also combine them into the same column. So for the sentiment polarity, we can assign positive for those with sentiment score over 0. So now if you want to write your result as a table, we can use the write CSV file and export the sample data set to our folder. So in here, I'm going to export it as data for Tableau, because in the next part, we're going to talk about how to use the results to create plots in Tableau. So once you do this, if you go back to your folder, you will see you will find a new data created, which is the data for tableau.csv. And in here, you will see that we have the user ID, the description. So these are from our previous data set. And these are the 5 new columns we have generated after the sentiment analysis.